The night he vanished, the dogs went silent first. Not barking, not whining, just sudden stillness, as if every throat in the dark had been closed by the same unseen hand. The river kept moving, slow and black, but even it sounded muffled, like it was being dragged under a heavy blanket. Somewhere far beyond the sugar fields, a single cry slipped into the air and broke apart before it could finish forming. By sunrise, the ropes that held the skiff along the bank had come loose on their own, lying in the mud like shed skin, still wet, still warm, even though no human hands had touched them. The men found no footprints. No struggle. No signs of a body dragged or carried. Only a long, narrow indentation in the soft earth, as if someone had stood there for a very long time, perfectly still, waiting for something that never arrived. They said it was impossible for a man like him to simply disappear. He had been seen at sunset, walking the path between the quarters and the trees, head lifted, posture straight, step unhurried. Too calm. Too composed. A presence that made other men lower their eyes without understanding why. The overseer swore he'd drifted into the trees. Another claimed he'd turned and looked directly at the big house, a faint light catching in his eyes, almost like recognition. But nothing about him ever suggested fear. Not in life. Not even in that final moment before the dark folded over him. What unsettled them most was not that he was gone, but that the space he once occupied felt fuller than before, thick with something that did not belong to the living. Even in daylight, the air trembled faintly where he had last been seen, and those who passed too close felt a warmth rise up from the ground, soft and breathing, as if the earth itself had remembered the exact shape of his body and refused to let it cool. By noon, the plantation had taken on the strained quiet of a held breath. Men moved more slowly through the fields, their sickles dragging, their hands trembling in small, noticeable ways. No one spoke the missing man's name, but every thought circled back to him. The space beside them, once filled by his steady presence, now felt like a shadow that had learned how to stand upright. Even the master's house seemed disturbed, its windows staring too hard into the distance, its doors creaking open and shut without a cause anyone could point to. The overseer rode the line again and again, eyes sharp, knuckles tight around the reins. He questioned the others in clipped, angry tones. Had anyone helped him? Had anyone seen him leave? Had he spoken of running? But every answer was the same. No. Silence. Confusion. And beneath it, something close to reverence, though none of them would admit it out loud. At the edge of the trees, where the ground dipped and the undergrowth thickened, they found the first sign that unsettled even the hardest men. The leaves were pressed flat in a wide circle, as though a great weight had rested there and then lifted without disturbing a single branch. In the center lay nothing at all. No blood. No torn cloth. Only bare, dark soil, packed down smooth, warm to the touch, as if the sun had chosen that precise spot to linger long after it had crossed the sky. One younger man dropped to his knees beside it, pressing his palm to the earth in disbelief. He pulled it away quickly, staring at the red marks on his skin. "It's like a heart," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Like the ground still beating. Laughter was supposed to answer such words. Mockery. Anger. Anything to break the uneasy tension. But none came. Only the sound of the trees shifting ever so slightly, though there was no wind. And somewhere, far beyond the fields, a slow, measured footstep pressed into the unseen path of the world, moving with calm certainty toward a destination no one else could yet see. By the third day, the air around the quarters had curdled into something heavy and sour, like a storm refusing to break. People avoided the places he used to stand, stepping around empty space with the same care they would give a sleeping animal. No one took his place in the line. The gap he left stayed open, a thin corridor of silence that seemed to stretch farther than its actual width. When the bell rang out at dawn, the sound lingered longer than usual, echoing off the trees, circling back on itself as though it were searching for an ear that would never hear it again. Whispers began to move in low, cautious threads. Some said he had never belonged to the land in the first place. Others swore he had been brought from somewhere that did not exist on any map, a place where men were not born but formed. An older woman, her back bent by years and her eyes clouded with age, crossed herself when his name almost slipped from someone's tongue. "Don't call him back," she warned. "Names wake things that want to stay dreaming." That night, the moon rose pale and wide, casting a bleached light over the fields. From the doorway of the quarters, several men watched the pattern of shadows stretch and twist across the ground. At first, they thought it was only the branches shifting. Then they noticed it wasn't random. The dark lines moved in slow, deliberate curves, tracing the same strange path again and again, pressing shapes into the earth that no human foot could have made. And in the center of it all, where the lines converged, the grass bowed lower, as if something unseen had just stepped there. For one brief, unbearable moment, the air filled with the faintest sound of breath drawing in. Then the night went still again. But no one slept. By the fourth day, the plantation carried a new weight, one that settled over the fields like a shadow thicker than any storm cloud. Men moved slower, their eyes flicking constantly to the tree line, where the fog seemed to coil tighter and darker with every passing hour. Even the animals had begun to behave strangely. Horses shied at nothing, their hooves pounding on soft earth as if the ground itself was shifting beneath them. Dogs, once eager and vocal, now crouched silently in the corners, ears flat, eyes darting toward spaces where no human could stand. The air smelled different too, a faint tang of iron mixed with ash, though no fire had burned. It was the smell of something living, breathing beneath the soil. By mid-afternoon, a group of men ventured toward the far edge of the plantation, near the swampy stretch where the river lapped slow and black. There, they found the first sign of what none wanted to speak aloud: a series of footprints, perfectly formed, barefoot, pressed deeply into the soft mud. They followed the prints with cautious steps, noticing how they curved back on themselves, doubled, and then disappeared altogether, as if whoever or whatever had walked them had decided to vanish into thin air. At that moment, the wind shifted, carrying a faint murmur of sound, too low to be speech, too deliberate to be the rustling of leaves. The men froze, each one straining to listen. It came again, faint but distinct, a soft dragging that circled around them, precise, deliberate. The hairs on their necks rose. One of them muttered a single word that echoed far too loudly in the still air: "He's here." They ran back toward the quarters, but even as they fled, a strange certainty settled over them. The plantation had been alive before, yes, but now it belonged to something else entirely. Something that had waited, patient, unblinking, and infinitely enduring. The thought left a cold echo in each man's chest: it had been watching all along. By the fifth day, the plantation had become a place of quiet terror, a living thing that breathed and watched through every shadow and ripple of the fields. The men who remained dared not speak his name aloud, for fear that saying it would call him back in ways they could neither understand nor control. The air was thick, heavy with a sense of expectation, as if something was poised to move, waiting for the moment when the living would falter. Even the sun seemed different, pale, filtered through a haze that dulled colors and cast long, unnatural shadows across the sugarcane stalks. By midday, one of the older field hands noticed something peculiar along the edge of the main path. Small depressions in the soil, almost like handprints pressed with the weight of a grown man, but spaced unevenly, as though whoever had made them had not walked in the usual rhythm of a human gait. He bent down, tracing the shapes with a calloused finger, and felt warmth rising from the earth, soft and subtle, like a pulse. He froze, certain that the soil itself was alive beneath his touch, and staggered backward, breath-catching. Later, as the sun began to set, the overseer attempted to rally the remaining men for inspection. They gathered at the quarter's edge, voices low and tense, hands twitching toward tools they had no intention of using. The silence stretched, broken only by the occasional murmur of the river and the faint, deliberate sound of something moving through the far brush. Then it came, a single, deliberate step that seemed to echo across the fields even though no foot had touched the ground. Every man stiffened. Somewhere deep within, they felt it, the unmistakable sense that something had returned, something patient, precise, and unyielding. And in that moment, the plantation itself seemed to breathe in unison, the air thick with the certainty that the vanished man had not left. He had only been waiting. The second fire arrived without warning, a bloom of orange that split the night air with unnatural precision. There was no storm, no careless lantern, no human hand to blame. It began at the far edge of the property, along the stretch of scrubland that had always felt different, almost untouched by time. The flames moved deliberately, not wildly, licking the dry brush in smooth, controlled arcs, as if they had been guided by some invisible force. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the wind had dropped to nothing, leaving the blaze confined to a single, perfect circle. The rest of the plantation remained untouched, the contrast sharp and unsettling. When the firefighters finally approached, they expected the usual aftermath: ash, charred earth, the lingering smell of smoke. But the center of the burned circle was untouched. Smooth soil, dark and almost glossy, remained, warm beneath their hands as if it had retained the memory of heat without ever being consumed. One veteran chief, a man who had faced every kind of fire imaginable in his 20 years of service, stood in complete silence, feeling an eerie pulse from the ground beneath him. He described it later as the sensation of standing over a sleeping body, not dead, but waiting. News crews filed brief reports. Fire mysteriously contained itself, the headline read. Locals knew better. They avoided that patch of land, even in daylight, their steps faltering when they came near. And then the dreams began. People miles away, strangers to each other, began seeing the same visions, standing in a pale, endless field under a dim, blue sky, watching a tall, barefoot man surrounded by countless shadowed figures. He never spoke at first, only watched. Then, in quiet, deliberate tones, he finally asked a single wordless question, one that left the dreamers waking with dirt on their feet and a memory of a presence older than the earth itself. The land had waited. Now, it was waking. The dreams continued, spreading like a slow, impossible tide through Baton Rouge and beyond, leaving the people who experienced them trembling and restless. No one spoke of them openly at first, but those who had seen the tall, barefoot man under the pale blue sky began to notice subtle shifts in their waking world. The air carried a faint tension, a vibration that felt almost alive. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, and the soft rustle of leaves often sounded like deliberate movement, like something unseen pacing just beyond the edge of perception. Those who had once walked the plantation reported waking with soil under their nails, dust ingrained in the seams of their clothing, even when they had never returned after the fire. The patterns in the dirt, faint but undeniable, mirrored the formations in the dreams, the footprints and trails that circled back upon themselves, tracing paths that should have been impossible. Doctors and scientists tried to explain it rationally, insisting the phenomenon was coincidental or psychosomatic, but even the most skeptical could not account for the shared specificity of the visions or the physical remnants that accompanied them. People began to change subtly. Children who had never been to the plantation spoke of fields they had seen in dreams. Adults, too, found themselves compelled to walk paths they had once avoided, feeling a pull toward the edge of the burned circle. Their minds replayed the dreams with unsettling clarity, and a strange awareness seeped into their daily lives, a sense that someone or something was watching, patient, precise, and unyielding. And always, at the center of it all, stood the barefoot man. He never moved more than a single step forward in the dream, but that one motion carried weight, commanding attention, imprinting his presence onto the waking world. The line between sleep and reality began to blur, and those who experienced it felt the pull of something ancient, waiting, and undeniably alive beneath the earth. By the eighth night, the strange presence had begun to claim the edges of the town itself. Windows rattled in homes far from the plantation, though no wind blew. Doors creaked open and shut on their own, and the faint, rhythmic sound of footsteps echoed along empty streets, stopping abruptly whenever anyone tried to locate the source. The more people resisted, the stronger it seemed to become, like a tide pressing against the limits of the world, patient and inexorable. Those who had previously experienced dreams found their waking thoughts invaded by fragments of the same pale blue sky, the same endless fields, and always the same barefoot man, standing unmoving at the center, watching. In the plantation's remains, investigators discovered something impossible. Where fire had left only scorched earth, new impressions had formed overnight: footprints and handprints, arranged in deliberate patterns. No one could explain it. The soil was moist, warm, as if breathing, yet untouched by water or human interference. Each morning, the prints had shifted, forming new lines and symbols that seemed to tell a story, though no one alive could read it. Even those who had never been to the plantation felt its pull, an intangible magnetism tugging at their curiosity and their fear simultaneously. People who ventured too close reported a heaviness pressing against their chests, an oppressive sense of being observed. Dogs whined and ran from the area without reason, livestock refused to enter the pastures near the old burned circle, and insects and birds avoided the trees that bordered the fields. The man in the dreams had become a force that transcended sleep. He existed not only in vision but in the subtle distortions of the waking world. The air itself seemed to bend around his presence. And those who dared to stand at the edge of the plantation swore they could feel a slow, deliberate pulse beneath their feet, as if the earth remembered him, as if he had never truly left it all. By the 9th day, the entire region seemed to hold its breath. The plantation no longer existed merely as a place, it had become a locus of something impossible, something that resisted explanation. Even those who had never set foot on the land felt its presence pressing against the edges of their minds, a subtle awareness that something was watching, waiting, and moving in ways that no living person could perceive. Reports of vanished animals, sudden shadows, and inexplicable sounds spread through the town, carried as whispers at first, then as frantic conversations that could not be ignored. People avoided the outskirts of the old estate, their paths bending instinctively away from the burned circle, even in daylight, even when no one else was present. The barefoot man had become more than a memory or a dream. He was a force anchored in the earth, in the pulse of the soil, in the trembling of air that seemed ordinary to the untrained eye but was laden with intent. Visitors who dared approach described a sensation of being measured, their intentions laid bare without words. One elderly woman reported seeing him in the fog at dawn, standing impossibly tall and silent, his gaze fixed not on her but through her, as though he could see the truth of everything she had ever done. By nightfall, a pattern had emerged. Fires appeared again, moving in circles as if marking territory. Footprints and handprints multiplied, precise and deliberate, creating pathways that defied human logic. Those who stumbled upon them felt a weight in their chests, a quiet insistence that they should leave, yet could not. In the end, it became clear that the man had never truly vanished. He had transcended the limitations of flesh and bone, becoming something far older, far more patient, and infinitely enduring. The plantation, the dreams, the fires, they were all echoes of his presence, reminders that some forces are not meant to be contained, and some beings are never truly gone.